Today, I want to talk about the Nick Fury problem. And for those that don't know, in Marvel Champions, the card game, allies are probably the strongest cards out there. Usually, when I'm deck building for Marvel Champions, I spend a lot of time thinking about what ally cards I'm going to be putting into the deck. Now, a lot of people have done builds where they don't put any allies in because it's more event based or it's more upgrade based or whatever it may be. But generally speaking, one of your strongest strategies will be using allies. Now, the Nick Fury problem is that Nick Fury was originally introduced in this game in the core box. So it's one of the very first allies we ever had. And he's a basic ally, which means that he can be used for any deck build imaginable because basic can be added to aggression, leadership, justice, protection. Doesn't matter. You can do just basic by itself. It doesn't even need to be teamed up with anything. So the Nick Fury ally is a 4-cost ally, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 3 life. Now, the way they try to balance out Nick Fury in general is by having him removed at the end of the round. So when he enters play as a force response, after Nick Fury enters play, choose one. Remove 2 threat from a scheme, which I don't think many people do, but it is an option that's there. You can draw 3 cards, which the majority of people do, or you can deal 4 damage to an enemy, which also can be a really good strategy on a final push. And then at the end of the round, Nick Fury, if Nick Fury is still in play, discard him. Now, what makes him so strong is that when he enters play ability, and especially the drawing the 3 cards. Because if you're paying Nick Fury's 4 costs and you draw 3 cards, it's effectively you're paying 1 cost, maybe 2 really, because you're putting Nick Fury also into play. And this doesn't include any resource generators that you may have. So being able to put an ally in there that's going to be able to exhaust the thwart 2 or attack 2, whatever you may want to do, and then being a cheap blocker after the fact, and we'll get into that more in a second, this makes him incredibly strong. And again, at an effective cost of probably 2, roughly, is what you would math it out to be. This isn't the first time Fantasy Flight Games has done this, because I know a lot of people have chalked this up. Well, they just designed early and they made a mistake, or they just didn't realize how powerful it would be. The problem is they did the same exact thing with Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, the card game. Now, I'm not going to go through Lord of the Rings, the card game, and how it really works, but roughly all you need to know is that he's a 5-cost card with a 4-4-4-4 stat line. Don't worry about what that all means because that's not really important. But at the end of the round, discard Gandalf from play, and you have a response. After Gandalf enters play, you get to choose one. Draw 3 cards, deal 4 damage to one enemy in play, or reduce your threat by 5. Now, it's basically the same exact thing, except for the reducing of the threat is instead went from 5 down to 2. And threat works a bit differently in Lord of the Rings, but still you can kind of see the similarities to it. So they've already done this design, and in the Lord of the Rings community, it was kind of a running joke that this was one of the most powerful cards ever. Now, maybe they thought the way it would balance out is because in Lord of the Rings, you can still have 3 copies of Gandalf in your deck for Lord of the Rings. Marvel Champions, you only allowed 1 copy of that card. So maybe they were thinking it balances that way because you can put in multiple copies, or you can only put in 1 copy of Marvel Champions allies, and then thus it's harder to get them. But there is ways to recur Nick Fury in over and over, because again, it's not even when he plays from your hand or anything like that. It's just when he enters play. Again, this can be from a recursion event that when he would normally get discarded, it comes back in, or if you play like Make the Call or something like that, where you get to, if he's in your discard pile, you get to use Make the Call to pay the printed cost of the ally and then put him back into play, and it would trigger his effect again. So there's ways to keep getting Nick Fury back into play to really kind of exploit this. Now, over time, I think they've done an okay job with trying to minimize the effectiveness of allies in this game. For example, they had the Grand Collection with the Collector, right? This is a very famous scenario in the Guardians Most Wanted campaign box, or just the expansion box, where according to the Collector, that anytime a card would be placed into a discard pile from play, put it face up in the collection instead, then place 1 threat in the main scheme, or that's for Collector 3, but then you place it in the collection. The Grand Collection states if there is at least 5 per player cards in the collection, or you would lose the game. And this was a way of, okay, if that card got knocked out as a chump blocker, right? Because a lot of people, what they would do with these allies, and we should probably talk about this too, is that not only you would be able to thwart 2 or attack 2, but because your life is so important in Marvel Champions, that you can now use Nick Fury as a blocker that round, right? So you don't have to worry about defending yourself. You don't have to worry about doing anything else. Nick Fury is just going to defend for you and be that blocker. So you have your 3-card draw with Nick Fury. You have your 2 threat removal or 2 damage, whichever you want to do, and then you have a free block. He goes to your discard. Hopefully you can recur him back in. So like I said, Grand Collection in the collector was trying to minimize this, but the problem is it kind of went a little overboard and wasn't as good. They also came up with, well, they already had overkill, but they started having more enemies with overkill. So for example, basically overkill just states that if an enemy defeats the ally, any leftover damage would go on to your hero and you wouldn't be able to defend against that. So for example, if Nick Fury had 1 damage on him from attacking or thwarting because of consequential damage, he would be down to 2 life. And if you had a villain or somebody swinging for 6, Nick Fury would absorb 2 of that, but then 4 would go over onto your hero with only a few ways of possibly defending that. Generally not being able to exhaust the defense. This was a way of them, again, trying to deal with that issue, that situation. And it works a little bit, but the problem is you don't want every single villain from here on out to have overkill because then it gets kind of boring and stale. Later on in the Mutant Genesis campaign, they also did Operation Zero Tolerance, which again is another interesting idea. It's a side scheme that says after an enemy attacks and defeats an ally, place that ally face down underneath this scheme, and then there's X amount of cards face down, you lose the game. Again, this was an interesting mechanic to introduce because unlike the collection where if just they left play for any reason, they went into this collection, which was really annoying, this specifically targeted allies. And I think this is something that the designers have now realized over time, that allies are incredibly strong. And the thing is that they started off really, really strong from like the very beginning of the core box, which unfortunately probably wasn't great. For example, we talk a lot about Nick Fury, but also in that box that I feel like doesn't get talked about as much is Mockingbird, the Bobby Morse basic ally. She's still incredibly strong if you're not playing against a stalwart or steady villain because 3 cost, 1 attack, 1 thwart, 3 life, which is fine, but after she enters play, stun an enemy. Now, stunning and confusing enemies are really strong as long as they're not stalwart. It's still really, really strong, and it's still a good card to use right out of the core box. Now, the other card that got introduced later on was Ironheart. I believe this was in the Wasp pack. Yes, in the Wasp pack. And this was another incredibly strong card. Wasp was introduced in the second cycle, I believe. So pretty early on into the game's lifespan, where it was a 2-cost ally, 1 attack, 1 threat, 2 life, and then after you play Ironheart, you get to draw a card, so it makes the cost of Ironheart even less. Also in this deck came the Power on All of Us, which was the basic resource generator that lets you generate 2 resources, which was really, really strong, and we can get into the whole basic card dilemma because there might be a dilemma with basic cards that they might be too powerful, and the Power on All of Us may be the reason for that, but that's a video for a different time. But anyway, the reason I bring up Ironheart is because early on in general, they were still making really powerful cards. Spider-Man Miles Morales, really powerful card. The most recent powerful basic ally is probably Professor X with his ability to confuse enemies. Again, he gets discarded near the end, but he allows you to thwart 3, which is really strong. He was in Mutant Genesis, so he's a 3-cost basic ally, 3 threat removal, 0 attack, 3 life. After he enters play, choose one of the following: confuse the villain, stun a minion, or ready an X-Men character, and then at the end of the play, you discard him. This is the only time they've kind of done something similar with Nick Fury, but it was a way to like kind of change things up, but still the same exact idea that you can play him, confuse your villain, which is really strong, and then thwart 3, and then use him as a chump blocker, and then move on with your life. So why do I bring this up with the Nick Fury issue? Because Nick Fury, as we have said, is a core box ally here, and there are very few allies that get even close to how good he is. And the problem is that the designers of the game probably can't come up with any allies to compete against him because he's too strong. And this leads to some weird kind of things going on in this game where people want new cards and new heroes to do different things with deck building, right? You only have a deck size roughly of you have a deck size of 40 cards, and you can go up to 50, but very few people do, and there's not a ton of good reasons to do it, but there may be some. So Nick Fury, as a core box ally, is probably still in 80% of builds. You don't have to include him if you don't want to, and there are certain builds that make sense not to have him. But generally speaking, in the vast majority of decks, he will make sense to put in. And this limits your deck building, right? Or deck construction, I should say. I should say deck construction. This isn't a deck building game, it's a deck construction game. So it limits your deck construction of what you can do. And the reason that's important is because, again, one of the big hooks of this game is that, yes, you play as the hero and that's great, but it's also that you can construct these awesome decks and these different aspects that do different things. But when you have a basic aspect that has one of the most powerful cards in it, it makes the construction process smaller. It makes it less so. It's the same with so many cards using all like the doubles, right? The basic doubles of energy, strength, and genius or whatever it is, where basically those cards get introduced into every single deck. I argue that Nick Fury is probably introduced in the vast majority of decks, maybe even Avengers Mansion, though I think fewer people are kind of putting that deck in, but it's still like a great card for expert building. Anyway, so the reason I bring this up is because he's a very, very, very strong ally, and allies are very, very strong, and they've tried to do things to limit the strength of allies, like I said, to get rid of chump blocking, but now, with this, you can't come out with too many allies more powerful than Nick Fury because then you start kind of breaking the game at that point. Again, I don't think that Professor X is better than Nick Fury, but I think it's them trying to match the strength of Nick Fury. And one of the issues is for me is that I go, okay, I'm just going to put both those cards in. I'm going to put Ironheart in. I'm probably going to put like Miles Morales in too because he's pretty strong. Or, Moon Girl if I'm playing champion. But regardless, Nick Fury, probably Ironheart, and Professor X will find their way into the vast majority of the decks, plus the doubles. So out of a 40 card deck construction, I'm already down to like, only 18, 19 cards I need to pick out, whatever the aspect cards are, and some more basic cards. And that makes the game kind of stale. So what do you do to solve this problem? Well, again, I think a part of the problem is being solved with Operation Zero Tolerance and all that fun stuff. But I do think they need to start thinking of ways to really make the game even harder where Nick Fury doesn't make sense. Either a mechanic that kind of punishes you for extra card draw or more chump blocking mechanics or whatever it may be. But they need to kind of make some more design elements around this. They need to probably also figure out a way for just to decentivize you to run allies. This is the other part of this is that allies are incredibly strong. It's probably the thing you're going to focus on the most with your game. And again, it kind of pigeonholes you in the game. Now, really quick note with me kind of talking about this is that a lot of people may go, well, I really just like playing allies. Why can't I just play the game the way I want to? And you absolutely can. Absolutely can. Don't let anyone stop you from playing the game that you want to play. But I think the designers of the game want you to experience the game in a multitude of ways because if you try it in a variety of ways, you're going to probably play the game longer, right? You're probably going to play more of the game. It's not guaranteed, obviously, but realistically, there's more things that you can do and more things you can try. You're probably going to be more into the game for a longer period of time. And I assume that's one of the things they want to do. And again, why they want to limit your ally usage. Now, this brings us to the very last point, the last point that we have, which is that the Nick Fury hero is going to be interesting. So the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. expansion is coming out next. We don't know if Nick Fury is one of the heroes. I'm speculating that there is. I think he's going to be in the box, but we'll see. What's going to be interesting about this is that Nick Fury is really strong in a multiplayer setting. Okay. So Nick Fury, I think most decks will run a copy of Nick Fury even in multiplayer. Like if you're playing a 4-player game, it would not be out of the realm of possibility that 2, 3, or maybe even 4 of the players at the table run Nick Fury. As long as they're not on the table together, you're good to go. Now, what if the hero, Nick Fury, is now a playable character? Well, you kind of need to make him a little bit stronger than what the ally is because the ally is so good, most decks include him. So you have to figure out a way to make Nick Fury good, but not broken, but good enough that people will want to play him so they don't screw up other people at the table, right, with wanting to run Nick Fury. But again, can't be so strong that he carries the game on his back. And this is, to me, going to be a really interesting design space that they're going to have to kind of figure out. I think this is going to be a lot of work. I'm excited for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm excited for it, for what the possibility can be with it. But I do think it's going to be a big challenge of how they're going to balance this because I could see it tipping that Nick Fury gets maybe a little too strong, right? Maybe a little too powerful. And there could be some issues with that, especially for the solo game community or even the multiplayer game community, right? Like if Nick Fury is so powerful, he's just kind of carrying games, he's not going to be played as much and people are going to be less interested in it, unfortunately. So it is this kind of weird dilemma that they have going on with Nick Fury. And again, the weird dilemma with how strong he is out of the core box and kind of limits your deck building. Now, maybe this is just me thinking that this is a problem, and the vast majority of you think it's not a problem. I'm really generally interested in hearing your opinions on this. Let me know either down in the comments or let me know on Discord. Make sure you join the Discord and all that fun stuff. Because I'm generally interested in hearing what people think about this. Like, is it a problem having an ally this strong out of the gate? This strong and that good, or is it not a problem? Does it not really bother you? Because hey, who cares if the ally came out right in the beginning of the game or the ally came out 3 years after the game was made, right? Like, what's the difference if the ally's still out? Generally speaking, and I think there's a valid argument to that too. Of who cares if the best quote unquote best ally came out in the core box? Now we have a ceiling in which we shouldn't break unless it's an absolute emergency and it needs to be like a crazy bonkers good ally for some reason, right? So I get that argument too. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Do me a huge favor, make sure to hit like, subscribe, comment, whatever. Support it, and wherever you're hearing this or wherever you're seeing this. I appreciate you all. Thank you all very much for listening. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you all next time.